Ryan Kahn, hello. You are a
Hey,
Ruby developer and you worked in financial institutions before in the US in different places, and you basically did a lot of things relating to software engineering, and you like anti-fragility, Nassim Taleb's content, everything related to that, and you're generally one of the most generalistic educated people that I ever met. So being anti-fragile in one's tech career, how would somebody like make this happen?
I mean, that's a difficult question, right? I do think that being an entrepreneur kind of helps you, right? If you, let's say, work for a company, right? So you have a single point of failure in the sense that if something happens to that company, especially if you don't work for, one of the big giant tech companies, you could get laid off, you could get fired, that sort of thing. If you kind of run your own shop, you can have many clients, right? So if you lose some clients, you don't lose all your revenue, right? I mean, that's less anti-fragile, but that's more being robust to failure. I think, for software itself, there've been some industries that have been anti-fragile when it comes to this whole COVID thing, right? If you look at companies like Amazon, or you look at online shopping,
Mm,
look at Shopify, or you look at people who run businesses, people selling hand sanitizers or that sort of thing, right? So some of those people have benefited from, everyone staying at home, right? Because you have to be able to ship stuff now. People can't go into stores, right? So I also think it also depends on what industry you're in. You know, again, right? If you work for yourself, you have clients, you can kind of pivot and
right.
help out these industries, right? So um, we've done a lot of e-commerce, right? So uh, that's helpful, right, for this type of thing.
Right. So like this, let's say, idea that if you have one boss, so you're employed, and then that is definitely the single point of failure. So basically, then if something doesn't work out there, so it could have something to do with you, like your performance might not be good enough, but also it could be something that has nothing to do with you, like just your job gets like outsourced to some other place, or the company is in a bad shape because the salespeople don't do their job. So there's like a million things that like can basically make you really like put you in a very bad situation. But whereas if you run like an agency or you have several clients, then it's kind of a different situation. But most people actually don't understand it because they like kind of, when I was still employed, I didn't I, like now I'm in a similar situation, but now I can say that I really understand what this actually means. But if you're employed, it's very hard actually to really imagine that. I mean, you can like think about it intellectually, but it's like if you like would describe someone like how chocolate tastes, or how love or sex or like drinking is, if this person has never done it, this person really doesn't really understand it. So for me it was actually like something abstract, like when I was like, because I was seeing all the like upside when I'm working. So basically, yeah, I have like an insurance employment, and like I have to just be nice to my boss and deliver like sort of okay work, and then will like just go on forever, and I can stay here and like just code and get like every month the same paycheck. But then somehow, yeah, it changed, and then I decided to that like another life with like several clients, and not a regular paycheck, but really like all the time fear, like okay, what will happen tomorrow. That might be something that is for this period of my life maybe the better decision. So how was that for you? Because I assume you also had maybe some thoughts like this, like okay, hey, like I cannot just really go and like do things on my own. So how did this happen that you did this transition?
Well, I mean, I I left corporate first to do a startup in the Bay Area, and we worked at that for about 9 months, and that didn't work out. Um, and then I moved back down to Southern California, where I'm from, and then started. We started working on a few projects, few SaaS projects. But at some point you need money, right? Like you need to you need to be able to eat. right? So then you know, you start picking up clients and start doing work from that perspective. And you know, it's just been a slow kind of ramping up over the years. It's taken a couple years to get into a good place, but you know, now things are looking pretty promising.
So basically, yeah, that's often what happens actually. Like companies, even bigger ones, that they would try to do like some product, but then they switch to like a project agency approach, which also like kind of brings money in, and you have no need to raise money from venture capitalists. And this is one of those things actually you don't see in the media, because like you see like on Hacker News, TechCrunch, you always see like this funding rounds, or you see like the successes like that become like IPO'd. But you actually probably 99% of the tech world is like something like this. Like you try some yeah product, and then you see, okay, like that somehow is not the right moment, or you don't find the right investors, or you don't really have a total product market fit, and then you just go the agency route, and then you maybe say, okay, this is actually not that bad and definitely better than being employed. um yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely ups and downs, right? One of the things when you're you know, an entrepreneur is that every dollar you make, right, you have to go get, right? No one's giving you anything for free, right?
Right.
So it's I think it's more difficult from that perspective because you have to go get the money. I think it also adds more stress, right? Especially early on, you have kind of the feast and famine type of you know, type of existence, right? You get some clients and you have some money come in, and then you can go a period of time without any clients, without any salary coming in, right? So it's times like those that you kind of miss, you know, the monthly salary. I think it's a, you know, there's a Taleb quote about it, right? The three most harmful addictions are heroin, carbohydrates, and a monthly salary.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I, 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 once you give up your monthly salary, that and you don't, you know, if you're not in a place where you're, let's say, financially independent or have some money, right? Once you give up that monthly salary, that quote kind of resonates with you, right? Because you really, really feel it, right? When you're working for a company, a big company, or any company whatsoever, right? With a W-2, every 2 weeks, there's money that magically appears in your bank account, right? It doesn't matter. You can be more productive or less productive. It doesn't really matter. Just money appears every 2 weeks. And that's not even, you know, considering all the perks, especially working in large tech companies these days. They have lots and lots of perks, right? So it's a very stable, pleasant existence. But you know, I'm also kind of reminded of what our friend Paul Portesi likes to say, right? When you try to create short-term stability, you end up fragilizing the tails in the long term, right? So it's kind of the same thing, right? So when you have a job and you have a single point of failure, right? It's very, very, very stable. But then something like the coronavirus can hit, right? And then they can just lay off large swaths of the company. Um, and then if the economy ends up, you know, if the economy ends up going down, then it's going to be harder to find a job, that sort of thing, right? So
Mm.
it can put you in a difficult situation.
I mean, the thing that you can do to counterbalance this, especially as like a programmer, is basically like keep up to date with yeah, with the most with modern technologies, and keep educating yourself what is out there. I mean, this is what probably is not a bad idea, to repeat the fundamentals, but also to see, okay, which shiny new JS framework is out there. Although probably the fundamentals are more important to be practiced. And my question that comes up is like, so there's two theories. So one is, if you become self-employed, then you have like a bigger a bigger pressure. So you really have to deliver, and you have to really like do qualitative work. Otherwise, you will get just fired, because you can be like fired any second, basically. And it's not like in a company where it's like, okay, yeah, this is like some of those not so really very performing people, so we will keep this person anyway, because yeah, we like, companies are sometimes, especially in Europe, like almost half social institutions. Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine, for example, he works as a developer in like a bigger company, but not too big, like 300-400 people. And then he tells me like, okay, like some of the older developers, he doesn't know like how Git works. Yeah, so he cannot like write a Git push, like he doesn't know that. And he's like, okay, where did I what is this? But then other people would be like really good. And in companies, in companies it's more like this, whereas as freelancers, freelancers tend to be somehow really really good. And is it because like if when you started like working on your own with several clients, did you like notice, okay, yeah, my code output is really better, my code's like I write like better code faster? Or did it become worse because definitely you're more distracted, right? I mean, you have to do like I know you have a business partner, he does the most marketing and sales part, but still like you're like a like two people company. So basically you I assume you also have like other work to do, like meetings or like talk to people much more than you used to. So somehow maybe your programming output is less good because you suddenly have like tons of other things to worry about. So what do you think is generally happening? Do you become
So
better or worse programmer as a freelance?
that's a very complicated question, right? So it also depends, right? So it depends on the client too, right? So um, to do better quality work, right? Obviously, it takes more time, right? So you have to pay more attention. You have to pay a lot of attention, especially if you're writing a bunch of code. You gotta plan ahead, that sort of thing, right? So it also depends on the kind of budgets people have.
Hmm.
Like a lot of engineers don't want to hear this. The way I look at uh, software and technology in general isn't really about the code, right? Of course, I'm an engineer. I like code. I want code to be clean. I enjoy writing code, right? But what the client wants has nothing to do with code, right? Unless you're actually working with a company who is an engineering company who who says the output is the code. They want the code. For most clients, what they care about is you solving their problem. That's it. They don't care what technology you use. They don't care how you do it. They have a problem that's giving them, that they need solved, and they need you to solve it. And that's it. That's what I like to say that I do, right? So, client comes to me and needs something built, right? So I try to get at, okay, that's great. You want technology built, I understand, but what are you trying to solve, right? What business pain point are you trying to solve, right? Because that's where the value is, right? They don't hire you to build, Ruby on Rails application, right? They don't care. They just have a business need, and they need a technological solution, and it's your job to kind of come to that solution however you can. Now, of course, better code, cleaner code, tested code is a better solution, but to them, right, all they see is the bugs or the lack of features, right? So
Hmm.
there's a big disconnect between what the engineer is trying to do and what the end user actually sees. And I think that a lot of engineers like to focus on the code side, right? Because that's how they are, right? That's how they think. But when you start to run your own business and you start dealing with clients, you have to kind of shift your mindset. You have to think about what the client sees, what the client feels, and what they're trying to do with your product, right? And that's where the main focus and that's where the value is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably totally not done by like many in an employee situation, because you might think, okay, my job title is front end engineer, so I should like write JavaScript as much as I can, and then they end up doing just that because, well, this is what they were hired for, and they try to specialize as much as they can in that. And thinking about all the programmers I know, I really know like maybe from all this many, yeah, probably hundreds of people, maybe thousands, like really there's probably just a handful that are capable of doing what you just said. So that seems to be like an extremely rare skill, because to have it, that would mean that you actually truly understand the business problem. And this is something that programmers are not really taught to do, or many aren't just interested, or some even have like, do you buy into this like Asperger thing that many tech people like have, like slight form of, and then of course it's impossible, because then you cannot empathize with humans, because that's kind of this mental problem actually, as far as I know, blocks you from really understanding like human problems, and business problems, I would say, also are in this domain. So mm.
I do think that we're going to talk about health, and we're talking about Asperger's, and we're trying to talk about the autism spectrum, right? Like these things all exist, right? I'm not saying that they don't, but I do think a lot of tech people kind of make excuses, right? For, I'm a tech person, I'm a hermit, I don't like people, that sort of thing, right? So that kind of story you tell yourself kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It kind of
Mm,
dictates how you interact with the world, right? Again, I'm not saying that these things don't exist, but I think that uh, you as a person, for the most part, have a choice, right, to learn and grow and try to be better at things you're not good at, right? You can say the same thing about technology, right? Whenever you work on a new technology or a new framework or a new language, you're not good at it, right? You have to put your mind to it, and you have to kind of learn uh, the ins and outs, the tendencies and the styles of that sort of language, and that takes a bunch of work, right? And
mm.
engineers like doing that work, right? But they don't like doing the work that it takes to interact with people and be better with people, right? So I I tend to think more things are a choice than people want to believe, and
Mm.
that's it's also kind of a defense, right? Like you don't want to do these things, so you kind of discount them, right? So again, right, that's I guess kind of my point, right? You can choose to be better at this if you want to.
So would you rather say, because there's like also these two theories, the one like that's talking about like productivity and like getting ahead, with the one people say, okay, like look, you have all the skills, and you to get like better at what you do, you should just focus, like look, okay, what I'm good at, and just focus on this, and like become like really 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 good in one thing. And others say no, so basically you should have like different skills, and you should work on your weaknesses, yeah, so to like, so from like I would say it probably depends when which approach is better. Maybe in big
I
companies
mean,
it's really better to become like a specialist, but if you're like on your own, or like a freelancer, then you definitely have to be a generalist, I suppose.
the issue with specialization, right, is that it increases fragility, right? So if you only can do one thing and the industry shifts, right, then what happens to you, right? So sure, as a programmer, you can pick up, if you've been programming for long enough, you can pick up different languages and that sort of thing, right? But if you're truly specialized in one niche, you become very fragile. And I am not a huge fan of just specializing in one thing, right? To borrow an idea from Scott Adams, he talks about the talent stack, right?
Right.
Instead of focusing on being the best at one thing, focus on being top tier at 5 different things, and the synergy between those 5 different things puts you at the very very top, right? So I tend to think that being good at a bunch of things is more helpful. Like, being the top 10, 20% of a bunch of things is better than being the top 1.1% of engineers,
But I think
right? I
that's,
mean,
I agree actually with that. But like what is missing a little bit always, if people say those things, that like definitely, yeah, you have to combine different skills. I mean, I actually agree with me personally. Probably it's really also on this. I'm more this kind of type of person who says, okay, I need to be like good at many things, and it's for me good to combine them. And I see how this is generally for many people a good choice, but you always, to make it work, you need some kind of like a degree of luck, and also like creativity. And I think a large amount of people like actually don't have this kind of creativity, and don't want to rely on luck. So I totally understand them if they say, okay, look, I'm gonna get this SAP certification, and then I be like an SAP the super super specialized consultant, and from day one I will make like a super good day rate, right? Because this is like true, you can like 3 months pick up probably some ABAP or COBOL or something, and then you're super specialized. You cannot do web development, you cannot do embedded development, you cannot do nothing. You can only do like ABAP, SAP, but you can bill the biggest rates probably in your location. So from day one, in a way. So I kind of understand this approach too, because then you kind of make a lot of money, although you're very young, and can, yeah, and you can invest and save it, and yeah, have a good life if you like really pressure yourself to be like this super super duper um, niche expert for something. And then if you choose a thing that doesn't go away, which is like ERP systems, right? Then
mhm.
this might be not the worst idea for some people.
I mean, I think that it just depends on, the risks you're wanting to take, right? I think that for the most part, technology is fairly stable. You can do this. As an engineer, right? Like I've kind of gone through very different iterations of programming, right? So I started, I started with C sharp, and then I moved to Java, and then I moved to Ruby, and then PHP and JavaScript, right? So like I think that even if you're really specialized, you can kind of switch if you're willing to put the effort into switching, right? So let's say you specialize in that what SAP enterprise, right? And sure, that's probably not going away because like huge companies use it all over the world. But let's say something happens, right, and then the technology shifts, right? As long as you're willing to put in the work and kind of learn a new framework and new technology, I think that given that your CS fundamentals are strong, that shouldn't be too much of a problem.
So basically, you have to choose things that are that have like, let's say, or like talking about like the path you just mentioned actually. So different technologies. So because you use all of them, and this is kind of also not so not I don't see that often. So would you say, and also like actually your combinations going from, let's say, typed languages to less typed languages, so C sharp, Java, strongly typed, Ruby, PHP, yeah, you would say dynamically typed, and
Mhm.
like what would be the summary of like experiencing all those technologies? Because some people would probably say like there's always this, yeah, PHP is like, yeah, for beginner programmers and they don't make a lot of money, and because you can drop in PHP like in an HTML file, that's why it has this reputation still. Ruby, yeah, a bit better from reputation wise, let's say, because like famous things have been built with Ruby, but that's true with PHP as well, of course.
There's WordPress, right? The number one, like the
Yeah, but like
one third of the entire internet runs on WordPress, right?
that's true, but the
So
reputation is really bad. No, I don't. I mean, the new Laravel and all those frameworks, they're really same as like Django and
yeah,
on Rails and so on. That nobody doubts that who has some kind of like insight in the industry, but the reputation is still there. And like I would be like on a meetup, and there would be like startup meetup. Okay, so which technology to use if you like, a bunch of non-technical people, and the guy presenting who's actually technical. So this was a little bit you would say, oh yeah, you best is you choose PHP because the developers are cheap and you can get them everywhere. and
that is
and
something you have to think about, right? So when I did the startup in the Bay Area, we coded in Clojure, right?
oh
And that coding in a Lisp-like language, functional language, right? It's very, very different than coding in an object-oriented language, right? So um, I one of the things we never got to the point where we needed to hire, right? But people do say that if you need to hire developers, for example, that are functional programmers or work in Clojure, they're harder to find and cost more money, right? So that's something you have to think about. On the flip side, Paul Graham argues this, right? He argues that that's the competitive advantage because you know coding in, I forget, he has his own dialect of Lisp. I think it's Arc.
yeah,
I think it's what it's called.
yeah.
Um, Coding in that is so much more efficient that it's worth it. But again, right, it's a trade off.
Well, definitely, like to find closure. Like if I see like closure on a CV, then I had never the case that like seriously, not like okay, I played with that, but like build something seriously. It's like there was like zero cases where this was like a bad person technically. So all the time you see Haskell or Clojure, like these exotic things, people who really manage to do something bigger with those languages, they tend to be like absolutely like good at other things, general software engineering, and there would be there would be like an extra level of ability to think abstractly and just understand really complicated and complex things. So I'm usually impressed by people who really used exotic languages. Whereas if somebody is like a Java developer, it's really like complete lottery. So basically, then you have the call, and sometimes it's like people who really have not done really, like they just did some if else like for 10 years, and others might be like extremely good. So, but just from the CVs, then it's like impossible to say anything. So you need to have a call and you need to have some sort of assessment. Whereas like this closure thing, or yeah, Haskell is like a strong signal that really saves me a lot of time, because it was basically always the case that people are really good who use that.
I mean, I think that the part of the problem is that, or the problem, or is that the barrier to entry for these languages is fairly high, right? Like you can teach someone how to write object-oriented code in an hour, but in order to actually write, like the concept of object-oriented code intuitively makes sense to humans, right? Because that's how we interact with the world, right? Everything's an object, right? Like we interact with things, right? And things have functions and things do things to other things. It's a very, very intuitive concept, right? And if you go to a functional programming language, it's all math, right? And it's all abstract math, which is not inherently intuitive, I would argue, to the vast majority of people that exist, right? So in order for you to be able to be productive in one of these languages, it takes more time to kind of develop your higher order abstract thinking, which is probably why, probably one of the reasons why it's a positive signal.
But but what the negative thing about like some of those, the subset of disclosure Haskell hardcore people, if you talk to them, you notice, okay, you cannot really put them. They are then sometimes either they chose to be really bad at like presentation, business things, and so on. They then tend, because of this math heaviness, sometimes they would like, if you would say something like this to them, then some of them would reply actually, huh, no, that's not true. So basically object oriented things would actually not make sense to them, and they would say, no, this is much more logical to deal with lists and with operations on those lists, because they are so much in this math world that to them actually
well, to them
yeah.
it's easier to prove correctness of math, right?
Than
It's
like
less
actually thinking
fuzzy
objects.
than architecture with objects and everything else, right? There's so many different ways you can kind of architect and kind of create the objects and encapsulate the objects, right? I think with math, it's a little more clear, I think, right? Because in the end, it goes down to it breaks down to very specific, basic mathematical concepts, right?
So can you write functional Ruby on Rails? Ruby, is this possible? I know it's not possible with Python. So Python really, Guido van Rossum says basically he thinks functional programming is really not readable, and that's why Python doesn't have a tail call optimization. So if you do recursive call, that you can do in Python, but like if you do it like if the function looks a tail call optimized, then still the stack grows, because the language is not optimized for it, but JavaScript is optimized for it, Java, and basically almost all other languages. But Python isn't, because Guido doesn't like functional programming. So how's that in Ruby? Could you because I know it's object oriented generally from the principle, but can you like, or do you do that, or do you stick to object oriented things?
So, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think about the latest Rubies. Ruby does not have tail call optimization enabled by default. Not
but
sure.
you can do it. Okay.
You can enable it. I mean, I think that, so I've coded in lots of languages by now. I've been developing software for a long time. I tend to think that you don't try to force the language to fit what you want it to do, right? If you're coding in a language, kind of fit your thinking into what the language is good at and how the language wants to be structured, right? So I think that functional concepts are good in any language, right? Like you should think about state, you should think about side effects. You shouldn't mutate if you don't have to, right? These are all very good concepts, especially, given the modern world, right? We got free performance from Moore's law for a very, very long time, in the sense that we were able to up clock speed over and over and over again for years or even decades, right? And now we've kind of hit a fundamental limit of how small you can make everything and how fast you can up the clock speed. So we're moving to a multi-processor world, right? And if you're running you say you're running multiple threads, right? Like mutating state becomes a lot more complicated, right? Because you have to deal with multiple different threads accessing the same state, and then you have to use locks and mutexes and semaphore, that sort of thing. If you don't mutate anything, which is kind of the advantage of functional programming, right? Like you kind of get multi-threading for free, right? So it's a little more complicated than that, right? But it's much easier, right? If state is immutable, nobody can come in and change a state under you, right? So I do think that's an important concept. I do think that when you're writing code in any language, even an object-oriented language, right? I mean, you should probably think about state and think about mutability and think about not necessarily mutating, right? Because you have to, again, right, an object-oriented language is still multi-threaded, right? So you want to make sure that you're able to do that without too much effort.
Right. So basically, that is kind of actually a thought pattern, like all these functional things. When I was studying, that was like something that we did had like a course on this and the benefits of functional programming and really like a whole module on that. But back then it was really like to us, it was like, okay, who uses this? Only geeks at university that need to prove stuff. And over the years, it's really now entered React, and yeah, through React and through functional programming, the mainstream started to adopt it. Yeah, those actually benefits. So basically, no side effects and thinking about those things.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be that like the object-oriented world really now benefits from those this kind of thinking. I mean, Java, for example, has since version 8. Also like lambdas and so on, so those things weren't available even before. So it's like actually Paul Graham says, so he has always this, or not always, but this famous blog article where he says, okay, there's this blue programming language and it could be Java or anything, and this blue programmer doesn't understand that there is like something higher, and this higher thing in his world is Lisp, which has macros, so that code that generates code. And
Code is
he
data.
says, yeah, so kind of I still didn't completely understood it, but I think it was kind of like I've like probably templates that are generated, because yeah, I never use something like that, any language that supports macros. So, but yeah, it sounds like it is something that needs a bit of training, so that you even use it, because I was never like, okay, yeah, I need macros for code. But I can imagine that sometimes it makes sense to have something like that.
Yep. I mean, you bring up a good point with like the client-side JavaScript frameworks like React, right? Like they do have the concepts of immutability and that sort of thing, right? Where they just re-render, like when you change something, they just re-render kind of the whole thing. It's yeah, I think it's very powerful, and I think that it's just something you have to think about when you're writing code, right? I mean, again, I like object-oriented languages. I code in these days mostly object-oriented languages. You just kind of try to take the best ideas and kind of make sure you write clean code using the best ideas. Yeah.
And the ideas like kind of change in a way. I mean, you still have like this, let's say, how you define a variable is this, like, let's say, what are the things that are still the same, like let's say like 40 years ago. So defining a variable, having a for loop, having an if loop, but then everything else around sort of changes. So we have like frameworks, and we have um, kind of stuff like Webpack, so tooling, insane tooling around everything, code completion. Now there are things like basically Grammarly for code, like code checking, so that you write better and cleaner and shorter code. This is something that is coming up right now. But like let's say 40 years ago, you got a computer, and you got a computer manual that said how to program the computer. And nowadays it's kind of, people are actually more detached. So basically, if they get a computer now, like a phone or anything, you don't get a manual how to program it. You basically
Yeah.
are supposed to consume it and swipe through TikTok or or Twitter. And so basically program, but so it's basically harder to get started, because you are not forced to really learn anything. But at the same time, programmers are like kind of like more in a comfortable situation, because they have all the frameworks around like the things that before you had to code on your own.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
was, you can say not a
it
but, like so basically it's like an and. So things become on each end of the spectrum. So the layman beginner user and the professional user, actually everything becomes more comfortable in a way, to produce things, which is probably a good thing.
yeah, I mean, like the tooling nowadays is very, very powerful, right? It's kind of funny. I kind of have come full circle in the earlier part of my career. I used a lot of Java and C Sharp, right? So Visual Studio or Eclipse, right? You use a bunch of full featured IDEs that are very, very feature rich. And nowadays I just use Sublime Text, right? So um, I've come to actually enjoy using Sublime Text from a speed perspective, right? A lot of people say very good things about, for example, like VS Code, and it's a very, very nice editor. But as with I believe it's an electron-based app, right? So as with most
Mm.
electron-based app, you have performance issues, right? They're slower, they use up more memory, and that's something I don't want in my text editor. I want my text editor to be instantaneous for everything, right? And I mean, it probably bothers me more than it bothers most people, like the imperceptible. Well, to me, it's not imperceptible, right? But like the tiny amounts of lag between every operation kind of annoy me, and Sublime is really fast, and I don't really feel any of that. Oh, no, I also am coding in a language like Ruby, right? So like I don't have, for example, coding Java or C Sharp, not an IDE. It's probably less efficient, right? Because you get the code completion. That's kind of the compiler kind of can teach you a bunch of things. It can code complete. It can underline things that'll break at compile time, that sort of thing, right? So you get some sort of benefit, right, from the kind of heavyweight IDE. But I think in languages like PHP or Ruby, you get far less benefit from that. And Sublime has its own code completion and that sort of thing. It's just not as it's very, very powerful, but it can't do the same things as having like a compiler and static typing, right?
So basically everything became more, slow if you compare it. I mean, back like 10, 20, yeah, 20, 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, you just had like terminals. So basically you had like instant feedback. You had no lag at all. You just had to use the mouse, the keyboard. You had no mouse. So basically, actually, that's why like still you use, some ERP systems. They still don't have a GUI. You just have like a
Yeah.
keyboard and then a black screen, white font, and that's basically it. But nowadays, if I use, for example, like Google Docs, it's extremely slow actually. It's like in the browser, and then you open this word processing document like Google Docs or Google Sheets. It's actually very, very slow. So I feel
Yeah.
you like in those situations. Like I'm amazed that we are like in 2020, and we
Well, I
still
mean,
haven't figured out to build software that's like lag free. I mean, this would be something that really many power users would benefit. And if you calculate, like, for example, I open Google Sheet and it's like let's say half a second, and like 3 billion people all over the planet lose this half a second. So it's like so much human life wasted just on lag of tools. So
I mean, it's a much harder problem now, right? Like Google Docs is a very complex product, right? It allows you to simultaneously edit with people across the globe. It tracks every single change per user. It does so many things now that it's a very difficult problem, right? You can't take lag down. There's inherent lag built in if you have to, one, talk to a centralized server with Google, and two,
hmm.
be able to talk to users all across the world, right? There's just the speed of light is the speed of light. That's there's kind of a floor of how fast that can be, and of course there's all these hops in between, right? So it's very, very hard. This is part of the move to the cloud, right? Is that you're not going to be able to eliminate most of this lag, right? Because that's kind of what they tried to do with some of the client side MVC, the single page applications, that sort of thing, right? You do a lot of things client side to kind of
Hmm.
improve speed and performance, but in the end, right, you still have to talk to a server that's thousands, or usually uh, there's many hops, but you have to talk to a server that's not where you are, right? So you still have, yeah, and you can play a lot of tricks with how you want to do the client side processing versus the syncing with the server, but like in the end, right, you're still talking to something that's not close to you.
but their example, I mean, it's only since recently. I know you use Superhuman as well, but this is like one example of like really okay. This piece of software uses all the browser features that there are, and it feels instantaneous, and everything happens instantly just because they figured out how to use the like most modern browser features. But like for example, Gmail or Google Docs and all those things that like as you said, okay, they are very complicated. That's true, but like. It just feels horrible. I mean, the average
But
user probably
Superhuman is a
doesn't understand.
native, right? Superhuman's a native application locally, right? So you can do a bunch of things if you're native. They also cache a bunch of things in the background,
Mm,
right? So all your actions
yeah,
are perceived to you to be instantaneous, right? But what's happening is they're caching everything under the covers and then sending them out to the server behind the scenes, right? Also, Superhuman is just you, right? So there's no need to have any sort of synchronization when it comes to other users, right? Google Docs or Google Sheets, these are very complex products in the sense that you and I can be in the same document, you in Switzerland, me in America, and we can edit this document simultaneously, right? That's a much more difficult problem, right?
yeah, that's true. This is true. Yeah. So basically, the problems that's in a way true. I mean, it's also true like for phones. So basically, people could say, "Oh, my Nokia 3710, I think it was like super small. I could throw it like from a house, from like the 10-story house, it would still work. It was the battery was like working for like 2 weeks." And I could call people, I could text people. But now, of course, phones can do like a million things, and that's why they are like bricks and basically need charging like 3 times a day. So that's the price we
Yeah,
pay for like
but even
limitless features.
but even think about, for example, if we talked on FaceTime, right? FaceTime audio, FaceTime video, or we talked on iMessage, right? Like these are all end-to-end encrypted things, right? These are much more complicated things than sending plain text messages, kind of through the old phones. If you send an SMS, right? Like you send in a plain text messages through the phone network. Now you have to encrypt and decrypt and manage keys and that sort of thing, right? So I argue that we have a much better product now. Even let's take away all the smartphone features, right? Of course, the smartphone is pretty much a supercomputer in your hand, right? It can do almost anything. But let's just go back to the basic features, right? So if you and I talk on FaceTime audio, right, the level of audio clarity is far higher than talking over a phone network,
Mm,
right?
mm.
It's also end-to-end encrypted, right? So people can't snoop in our conversation. Same thing with FaceTime video or iMessage, right? So I would argue that people like to say the old phones did the basic things better. I disagree, right? We have high fidelity end-to-end encrypted forms of communication now, which we didn't have before.
That's true. That like you basically have some features that the average user just wouldn't really appreciate. That wouldn't be understood by most people. That actually end-to-end encryption is really actually hard to implement, and it's of course much easier to send just data in clear text like an SMS. So basically the world improved in this direction, and that's why we still have to work like 5 days a week because you have so much more stuff to build. I mean, I just had yesterday the conversation that yeah, basically, I mean, 100 years ago the people thought, okay, if technology comes, right, it will basically solve most of the human problems, and then we need to work only maybe 2 days a week instead of 5. And now 100 years passed and nothing improved. It's like the same duration of work week. So where did all this productivity go? Because we have all these magic machines, but people still work the same hours. It's really not really, let's say, in this regard, didn't become any better. So maybe people, yeah, because of these features actually. So we have more stuff that can do much more things, right? So
Yeah, I mean, there's always new stuff and new ways of thinking, right? Or new applications of technology that are limitless. It's hard to kind of sit down and think about all the ways that technology has changed our lives, right? I forget who. I think it was back in the early 1900s. There was someone who worked at the U.S. Patent Office who said, "I think everything that's been invented has already been invented." Right? And then uh,
that's
look
horrible.
at what we have now, right? Like
So when was that
early
approximately?
early 1900s, I believe, like 1902, something like that.
But
but like nobody could even comprehend, right, the new things that would come up, right? If you look at you look at the microprocessor, right? Or uh Einstein and relativity and quantum mechanics and all this other stuff, right? Like these are just concepts that are so foreign to us, right? That you couldn't have even imagined. Like if you just think about the complexity of a a processor, right, down to the transistors, the it's just beyond comprehension. Even to me right now, I know this exists, right? I know the technology exists. I understand basic fundamentals of how the technology works, and it's still just beyond comprehension to me. It's shocking.
Right.
And there's chips that are there's chips in everything, right? There's chips that cost pennies that are in your $5 electronic device, right? It's actually crazy what the world looks like now if you really think about it.
So basically, there's this Peter Thiel idea that we now live in an anti-technology age. That you're right. I mean, all these wonders exist, and they were actually discovered in the last 100 years, partly because of the wars. I mean, this already is known that this already this always increases the speed of discoveries. But now, I mean, this Peter Thiel idea is that we live in an anti-technology age. So basically, there are no new discoveries in the last 20 years. The only discovery we really have is the internet. All the other
Mm-hmm.
inventions, they're really like, well, just like some things that are kind of connected to the internet. So in the world of physics, in the world of atoms, we have zero innovation, and people are scared of technology. And all the movies show this, like the new movies about, like the recent contemporary movies about technology are like, okay, yeah, robots that kill us. Whereas like in the 40s, 50s, 60s, the movies will be like, okay, we go to space, and there's like some good connection to technology displayed in the movies. And now it's more negative all the time, like robots killing all humans. So basically, the next 100 years might be actually not that, or maybe if he's right, then actually there might, yeah, we might still have like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, just some other social networks, and everything else would basically stay the same. Maybe there would be some electric cars, but this would be about it. It would be sad.
Well, I think part of the problem with technology is that it disconnects us from the way we use technology in modern society, right? Is it kind of disconnects us from human interaction.
Mm.
And I think people are kind of feeling the effects of that. Um, especially in times the current times with COVID and everything else, right? People are kind of disconnected from their friends and their family. And sure, the technology is great in the sense that the technology is able to provide some of that connection over the phone, over video chat, that sort of thing. But what my kind of thought on that is that that's very useful for these times, right? But I think what's been happening, especially lately, is that people kind of use that to fulfill the interaction need, but it's not quite the same, right? It doesn't provide you the same interaction as actually interacting with people. So it leaves you in it satisfies you enough that you don't go crazy, but it leaves you in a state of wanting, right? And it's like people kind of permanently live in this kind of state of limbo where they are able to get some interaction with people through technology, but not really the right interaction. But it's not bad enough for them to do anything about it, but it's not good enough for them to be happy, right? So they're kind of stuck in this state of not of kind of malaise, right?
So what are the elements missing? I mean, because I think, okay, I can see the person, I can hear the person, I cannot smell the person, I don't see the person really in 3D. I'm not, let's say, in the physical proximity, which probably makes a difference to be like really connected and in the moment. But like, yeah, it's like a fake. It's like a, I
It's
mean,
fake, exactly.
but somehow it's fake, but it's like real enough to be considered a real alternative to being physically there still. And now like everybody's remote, Twitter goes remote, Shopify goes remote, fully remote, companies with like thousands of people. I mean, it works for Basecamp and smaller companies, but I'm really eager to see how it will work out with like this companies that have like thousands of people. I mean, Yahoo, didn't they go back? So basically, they had remote workforce, and then suddenly they said, okay, no, everybody has to go back to the office. I remember that because back then, like, we had to talk in my office where
They
I was
did.
working, and they're like, and my boss said, oh yeah, see, Yahoo goes back to office work, so we'll definitely not allow any remote work. And we were like, okay, oh no. Yeah.
I mean, I think
It's,
I think the extremes. I think the extremes are probably bad, right? Like saying no one can ever work remotely, or saying that offices we only work remotely and offices are pointless. I think those are probably both bad opinions. I do think that I kind of have multiple thoughts on this, right? This work remotely. We spoke about engineers earlier. This work remotely is some like weird nerd fantasy about how they want to structure the world, right? And I don't think
yeah.
it's going to be as great as they think it is for multiple reasons, right? One, there's a human interaction factor, right? From both a emotional aspect, how you feel, right, interacting with humans, and both from a product, another from a productivity aspect, right? Like I do think that in-person interaction uh, has productivity benefits, right? So while you can make purely remote work with meetings and video chat and that sort of thing, it doesn't quite have the same effect as being in person and talking things through, right? Now, you can argue that it might not be worth the increase in productivity. That's another discussion altogether. Let's leave that one aside. But I think I would disagree strongly with the argument that purely remote workforces peak efficiency is equivalent to workforces that have people who meet in person, right? And I do think also when it comes to purely remote work, I've tweeted about this, right? I think salary is going to drop, right? You've now pretty much said that there's no reason that I have to see you or have to be in an office with you, right? And one, there's a lack of skin in the game, right? So now, like, if I don't interact with you personally, you're
Mm,
some entity far away, right? So
right.
there's downsides to that already. And two, if that's the case, then why wouldn't I outsource your job, right? Why wouldn't I just send it somewhere else, right? It probably will increase globalization from that perspective, right? If you're some faceless entity writing code for me who lives somewhere far from me, why would I pay you $250,000 a year when I can pay someone else 50, right? So I do think that the part that people aren't understanding is that of course you can't know this, right? But my guess is that salaries are going to drop. Plus, a lot of these high salaries, right? All these FANG companies in the Bay Area, your salary is so high because the Bay Area is a ludicrous place to live, right? But
Mm.
if I can purely turn my workforce remote, why would I hire people in the Bay Area when I can hire someone in the Midwest who charges one third the cost, right? So I think from a competitive pressure, that has to drive the prices down, right?
Yeah, but wouldn't it, like, what I'm asking myself, yeah, of course, the virus now like made it kind of mandatory for everyone who could do remote work, and the tooling is much better. But is it really like Zoom now? Is it really like so much better than Skype 10, 12, 14 years ago? Maybe slightly, yeah, you have group chat and so on. But like if this thing, like, why didn't it yet didn't happen? Because we had 30 years like of internet where this we could have already done it. And will it now really make a difference? And yeah, we have like a little bit better tool, a little bit better internet. I mean, still, like, you can't really call people in Germany because they have shitty internet, and all those things might actually, like, so yeah, isn't it like, if this should happen more, will it, like, why didn't it happen before? This is what I'm asking myself all the time.
I mean,
And
I argue that it's not. Of course, there's like people people are resistant, right, to shifting the paradigm from in companies like oversight over the employees. It's much easier to have oversight over your employees if they're in front of your face, right? You've heard the stories about companies now and trying to install software,
mm,
monitoring software on your computer because you work from home, that sort of thing, right? So I do think that there's some perverse incentive from a corporate standpoint to monitor your employees, and it's easier to deal with their when you're in person. But
but
outside
is
of
it
that kind
really? I
of
mean, now you have this, like, all these tools, like, people were forced to install like malware on their computer. It's not really easier to track you, because if your screen is like to the wall and you sit there, I'm not constantly like looking what you have on your screen, and then you can slack off. I mean, the monitoring part, yeah, you can monitor the body, but you cannot really monitor the mind.
Sure, but at least I have to be sitting in that seat, right? That's the different, at least they're sitting there. But I mean, outside of this, I think that the real issue is that remote work is, it's harder to do, right? It's
Right.
harder to do correctly. And I think that there's pitfalls, right? It's harder to, one, it's harder to do correctly, and two, you have to have an entire team that buys in. If somebody wants to game remote work, it's a lot easier, I think, than being in person, right? And again, you kind of have that missing skin in the game, right? So you don't have to look someone in the
Yeah,
face.
yeah. I think
You don't have to look someone in the face and just lie to them the entire time, right? It's you lie to some face of entity that is hundreds of miles away or thousands of miles away.
right, because they kind of become family if you really are all the time close with them, and that's why like people do this all the time. Yeah, let's go for beers together and all this, and like so
Exactly, right? So
basically
like you're kind of
to make
building
you
this.
emotional family feeling such that you definitely don't betray your employer. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, there's even some things with remote work that many people don't even know. For example, you cannot like I was once on a lecture about it by a Swiss labor lawyer. So basically, how it is actually you have to also watch out where you outsource to. If you outsource, like let's say you hire somebody in Germany, then German labor law applies. So basically, if you all those notice periods and so on. So basically, what could theoretically happen? You mistreat, let's say, or let's say you mistreat this person, and then, or like you do something, and it's actually German law that applies, and you thought maybe it's Swiss law, which is a bit more relaxed. Then this German person actually can go to the German court and say, okay, let this and this and this happens, and German law applies. And if the court in Germany says, okay, yeah, that is true, you like this person should be paid like whatever 50K more because the person was fired, they were for some wrong reason or something like that. So it's like the penalty is 50K. A German court decides this, and what this person can do is the person can just enforce this decision in Switzerland. It's actually not that hard. It's actually doable, and those things people don't even know that is also like a factor.
Yeah, exactly.
And I suppose there are like some other things like political, like if it's like a country where like the situation, I mean, is unknown, or like if it's not your country, basically you by definition know less about it than what's happening in your country or in your state. And then there's like power, like really I had once someone also like some freelancer, and this person then had an energy outage. Yeah, so I didn't even think like this was for me an unknown that electricity doesn't work. That was never. But in countries that are more that are not that developed, this was really like, oh yeah, the person wrote me, yeah, I had to start the diesel generator, and my landlord doesn't allow to start the diesel generator for electricity before 7 a.m. or something like that. And I was like, okay, this was an unknown. Yeah, so basically, maybe there are like other things like cultural things are usually underestimated, language things, there are probably things that we haven't really thought of which can happen, and especially at a scale that big companies like Twitter have. So I'm surprised to see like where this all ends up, and how people are gonna deal with all that, and if salaries really gonna drop, because like I mean this on the small scale like Basecamp and all those small companies. For example, Balsamic is also like a design product. There's like 330 people and everybody's senior and they work all remote, but and they pay like US average salaries, although people are in Europe, they're everywhere. So companies don't say, oh yeah, you live in a poor, like in a poor country, let's say, all over the living cost is really low, so you get much lower. So because this is like also like a super feeling of unfairness, because yeah, that's kind of true. I live in an area where the cost of living is below, but I do exactly the same as somebody living in New York or San Francisco. So yeah, I mean, this person just should move somewhere else. So kind of it's like this, yeah, this employee thing always has this connotation of like, so they should like treat you like a family member. So yeah, you live in an expensive place, so you get more money, but actually, yeah, this you don't have with freelancers in a way. You don't have this. To come back to the very thing we talked about in the beginning, so they're like those things are not in the calculation. Yeah, so you only have, okay, what's the output I can expect from you, and then it doesn't
Yeah.
matter where you live. It's much less the case. Yes, it's much more. I mean, Nassim Taleb says this that money like cleans up relationships, and with like a freelancer situation, I feel it's like really much more clearer. So this is like the deliverable, and this is the money paid, and that's it. And we don't have any like networking beers or trips for team building. This is like much less the case. It's much more like an honest exchange in a way, because it's much more like this is about money versus a deliverable. But probably, yeah, huge startups where you really need to go through like good and bad times, it's hard to do. Like Nassim Taleb writes in this article, how to legally own a person, that the employee would stay with you during hard times and not jump away for some like opportunity that comes along. So
Yeah.
that's really,
I mean, I think the companies have done a great job, like kind of manipulating, right? I do think that the entire thing's kind of bullshit, right? Like, it's a family when they need something from you, right? It's a business when they fire you, right? So like,
yeah.
I think that they've done a good job kind of creating this illusion of kind of compelling this strange one-way loyalty, right? So
Right.
I
One-way loyalty is a good
I
word.
Yeah, right. So like when I tell people, right, who incorporate, right, like don't ever feel bad for your company. They will cut you the moment that they have to, right? If you get an
Mhm.
opportunity that's better for you, take the opportunity that's better for you,
I see it even like at
right? I
at
mean,
the beginning, like when there is even no relationship yet. So somebody made it through the interview process, like all this round. So you really got to know the people, right? And then people would be saying things like, "Ah, I don't want to make like a bad impression, asking for like a bigger starting salary." And then I have to really train people about it. Hey, look, this is normal, and they will not feel like unless you ask for like 3 times the thing that was discussed initially. But if you ask like for 5% more, for 10% more, it's usually not the case, because you can argue, yeah, but during the interview I saw that you do like JavaScript heavy stuff, and this is what I did in the last job, so I really, really can hit the ground running, and nobody will be angry. But people still that are not trained in this, that like have been like the specialized coders that just did coding and feel cozy in this employee environment, and like, no, they like, this feels really bad, and as if they asking their mother like for money or something
yeah,
like that.
exactly.
And
And
I'm like, look, yeah.
it's something that, early in my career I didn't do as well as, and it's I understand, right? Because there's emotions there, and I feel emotions there. I understand uh the process, right? But I think, I mean, you probably know this better than I do, given the work that you do. But one of the big things for me that kind of I learned many years ago is that once a company gives you an offer, they have spent a lot of money like from interviewing you, flying you out, everything else, right? If they don't assign you, that's a loss for them, right? So that you have that to your advantage, right? You know that they're just not going to, if you ask for more money, they're not going to just rescind your offer, right? There's already a sunk cost. They've already spent so much money, right, getting you to that point, that of course they'll have a conversation with you, right? And I think that understanding the power that you have, being in that position where you're wanted and they already spent money on you, is kind of the mindset you have to be in order to be able to negotiate. People are afraid to lose their offers, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, right? But that's probably one
It
of the reasons
actually
why you
doesn't
should try
happen.
to get
Like it
multiple.
actually, I think like we had like in recruiter Twitter, we had really like made a survey. Like, did it ever happen that when a candidate asked for more, like that the offer was resigned and no one could, and all those recruiters, they like see like thousands of processes during their careers, right? And we didn't have one single case
Yeah, so
of this
maybe it doesn't
happening.
happen, or maybe it happens like
Or like
0.1% of the
one,
time, right? Or
yeah, right.
yeah, but again, right? It's a framing, and nobody teaches you this, right? Nobody teaches you this.
Mm,
It's funny, right? People go to school, and this is another conversation altogether. But people go to school and get educated and blah blah blah. This one technique can earn you hundreds of thousands, if not more, maybe even seven figures in the right situation over your lifetime, right? And nobody teaches you
yeah,
this skill.
because nobody really can like,
It's
because maybe because like at the professors and like, yeah, teachers, they are always actually getting like a standardized salary. So basically you always get this like exact
Yeah, I mean,
rates. So a teacher gets like, so basically they never have actually, I think, the idea that this is actually possible. So since you're educated in high school and school, university, by people who are like the most dependent on the state or on some like huge institution that's like super bureaucratized, they never, even for them in the world, it never exists. So basically the students never get to talk to someone who really did it. So that's why
yeah,
like nobody learns it, and then you have to figure it out on your own, and this is really hard because you have to leave this
I mean,
like
that's part of
human
the problem.
hmm.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of the problem with education in general, right? Like, I'm not like you're in general taught by people who've never done anything real, right, in their entire lives. I'm not saying all professors. There are obviously exceptions, and they're obviously good professors, right? But for the most part, none of these people have actually done anything outside of academia their entire life. And academia is this weird bubble that has, it's like this fantasy bubble that has like strange rules, right? That don't resemble the real world.
That's shocking actually. Yeah, I mean, in engineering I thought like, or basically in engineering is probably least the case because many of those
Yes,
people
that's
who
true.
like teach, but still it's hugely the case, like still the level of, let's say, incompetency or like disconnect to the real world or industry, even in fields like ours, like is so huge, it's unbelievable. I don't even want to know like about other fields that are more theoretical, but in computer science, like all our professors and teaching assistants, they were all, well, I mean, they did maybe some things in collaboration with like a company or something like that, but generally if you look at their CV, it's really like, okay, they studied and then they liked it so much at university that they just stayed there. So
Yeah.
basically it's really interesting. I mean, our school did some effort to bring in like people that would give like a guest lecture, but then it would always be like huge companies. It would rarely or only sometimes be like smaller companies, entrepreneurs. Only on, yeah, like mingling events you could like meet sometimes people that like smaller companies that kind of have a different drive and direction and energy to them, because like a Siemens or BMW or Mercedes, like all those German companies, because I went in Germany to university, they all are like almost also like state government institutions. It's
Yeah.
like you work for the government if you work for Siemens essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of frustrating, right? I think that the whole COVID crisis is going to do a number on schools, right? Which is good. From the education bubble has pretty much damaged, right? Like higher education now, outside of very few fields and very few institutions, it's a big mess, right? I mean, we have it's so expensive for nothing, right? I mean, the value proposition is kind of just crazy, right? Outside of few degrees and few colleges, for the most part, you're screwed. You come out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and you're done, right? I mean, this is we have to do something about this.
I mean, but still, it's like why companies. I mean, I still have like one or two companies in my network that really say, "Oh, we will not hire anyone or talk to anyone who doesn't like have an like a computer science degree or a degree." And the reason for that is actually not that they learn like computing or like programming or anything like that, but because they can sell those people for more money. So they're like, okay, yeah, we have only like people who have master's degree in computer science that they then tell to clients, and also like
Sure, sure.
loyalty and obedience. So basically this proves, yeah, you can do something like for a longer time and sit in some place for a longer time, and you tend to be like more loyal. And some companies, they are shockingly like direct to me with this. They're like, I'm saying, well, why you need like this degree? Because I have a lot of people in my network that can program really well. They say, nah, it's like we can sell them for more to clients, and also like it shows us that
Hmm.
those people will stay with us forever because we have the data, and that's why we hire only people like from universities. So that's really sad.
Well, I mean, STEM degrees, right, generally have a lot more value than other degrees, right? Without getting too much into the this whole thing, right? I just think that there's a lot of perverse incentives right now that are leading to the education bubble, that are leading to the cost of college, that sort of thing. I'm not saying that learning certain fields is bad. I'm saying that the structure and the institutions surrounding it are currently uh, corrupt and broken.
They just grew over hundreds of years, and now we are stuck with the result.
Exactly. Yep.
So what would you do as if you're like a 20-year-old person who can understand math a little bit and who can operate a keyboard? Just jump into Udacity courses and program stuff that you want to use on your
Yeah,
own.
I mean,
Learn
there's
JavaScript, Python.
you can do it yourself. There's all kinds of things, right? I mean, again, there's boot camps. There's there's things like Lambda School or General Assembly or a bunch of other things, right? And some of those things don't even cost that much money. Some of them, like Lambda School does income share, right? A bunch of other things, which I think are great things. Um, but yeah, I think that you want to think very carefully about the ROI, right, of what you're doing when you go to college. Think about which college you go to, and think about how much that college costs, and think about the field that you're entering, and see whether you think that's worth it, right? I think that it's true. A lot of the big companies won't hire you without a college degree from a top school. These are just the facts, right? I mean, sure, you know better than I do, but it's just something you want to think about in a way, right? So I know people who have gone through boot camps and now make decent money, right, as engineers. Um,
Hmm.
sure, like a lot of them have college degrees and whatnot, or they had college degrees not in a computer science field, right? But like the need for software engineers, there's a huge need. I'm sure you know there's a huge need out there, right? So if you're good at your field, not you might not be able to get a job at Amazon or Facebook or Google, but you'll be able to find a company that will pay you good money to solve their engineering problems.
But didn't we just said that like everything will be more remotely and maybe this will be like a career that doesn't pay after all, and programmers are the new blue collar workers and everything will be outsourced to poorer countries, and then you'd rather, as a career choice, I was just thinking, okay, it's maybe better to tell young people, okay, just become a plumber or like do elderly care or something, because those things definitely can't be outsourced to like some other location because you have to be here and repair the toilet and yeah, basically do the work with your hands, right? And countries are
Yeah,
closing down,
I'm
like
not.
the immigration and so on, and every like, I mean, things become more restrictive. We will have soon a voting about this, like because our borders are basically open to the European Union for labor because we can export stuff, and I think there will be a vote in September about this, and they had it already once, so it's really here a hot topic. US is known for also very being like, okay, closing, opening, and 100 years ago everybody could come. Now, like for example, I cannot come, although somehow I speak English. I work in tech, but it's like super hard. You have to do H1B and all this. So countries change in this immigration thing, and then I'm asking myself, should I just rather tell a young person, yeah, okay, if you don't mind like repairing toilets, then this seems to be like the career that definitely will not go away because people will go on toilets. Those toilets will break, and somebody has to repair them, and this will be like in the location where you are. And in New York, San Francisco, Zurich, like the probably salaries for those things will stay stable. While, as we said, why should I not pay somebody from far away to code?
Well, I mean, this is kind of my point about like remote work in general, right? I think that this is some nerd fantasy that's not. If you ask me to guess, I'm going to guess that the world isn't going to be as remote as everyone thinks it is, right? It to borrow another word from our friend Paul, it's all about emotional alignment, right? Like when you try to work with teams that are not in front of you, that are scattered across the country or the world, it's harder to do. It feels worse to me anyway. It feels worse, right? So
Mm.
having no interaction at all is going to be problematic. I work from home all the time. I run things, like everything is remote. Like I understand that for small companies and for everything else, the benefits outweigh the downside. But I'm unconvinced. People make it sound like working in an office is all downside, and that remote is only upside, right? And it's life isn't that simple, right? There's a trade-off you're making both ways, and I'm unconvinced that the world is just going to say we're going to make that trade-off, and every single company is going to go remote. I think that once this is all over, people will start going back to offices. Will it be 100% what it was before? No, but my guess is that people will start going back to offices.
Yeah, maybe Twitter, like in 5 years, like it will be the same headline, but just not Yahoo, but Twitter. Like Twitter decides to go
Yeah.
to force everyone to work from from the office again. This would be funny.
Or it'll be like some sort of hybrid, which a lot of companies are now, right? You work in the office 4 days a week, or 2, 3 days a week,
Mm,
and you work at home for the rest, right? I think that's probably a reasonable compromise.
mm, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's just different, right? These are different things, and I also think that if you took the normal population and force them to work from home in mass, the lack of social interaction would be problematic,
Mm,
right? I don't think people will like it.
right.
I'm not even
Yeah.
convinced. I'm sure some engineers will like it, but I'm not even convinced lots of like I'm not even convinced the vast majority of engineers think this is a fantastic thing. But I could be wrong on that one.
That's true. I mean, the human interaction and let's say, yeah, skin in the game, basically, really being there, being like responsible, like with your physical presence, is something that is very hard to replace. Alrighty,
Yeah,
Ryan, should we wrap it up?
sure. I'm not sure how long
And
we've been talking.
since this will be online, we will actually be able to check what happens in 3, 5, or 10 years down the line with remote work and everything else. All right. Thank you and have a good day.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.